like your style. So, I would say, do you want us sitting in any certain order?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope, thank you. So, Bria, nice to meet you
Nice to meet you
officially.
as well, John.
I hope Kwame's in the building somewhere.
Somewhere.
So, John, are you responsible for information services at the AUC or one
The
of the
Spelman
colleges?
College.
At Spelman.
Yeah, and we have a CIO council where all the CIOs from the schools come together and we collaborate, work on things. But we're really independent, so I'm at Spelman.
Right. But if I reach out to you, can I ask you for those?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. Yeah. On any campus, we're pretty.
We have not, obviously, in the past, recently, just stream about recruitment. We need to, especially since we opened up our office here in Atlanta.
Right.
And we got a new senior there, Georgia State University ranking. So I'm hoping to
What types of backgrounds or majors?
yeah. So
Yes, through our supply
really
diversity
business.
program.
Yeah.
But I would like,
Then
that's actually one of the things that's under my purview. So I'm actually working with our chief procurement, other supply chain officer to focus more on like
It might be that you could connect with Google.
100%. Yes.
But
There's a conversation that's just started, and it's about putting liberal arts students in non-traditional fields. And I think that's something that could be explored. Yeah.
absolutely right. No, I know a number of individuals, English degrees,
Yeah.
literature degrees, history degrees,
Yeah.
and they have the technology
They do.
skill set.
Yeah. They just have to be introduced.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. Again,
Connect.
non-traditional. How do you think about that? And that's the other
Right,
thing.
right.
Do you really have that?
That household.
Yeah, there's a lot of junior technical colleges out there.
Yeah.
I did research on that.
Yeah. That conversation's happening.
Oh yeah, I know. I know.
Kwame.
Hey, how you doing?
John Wilson.
Good to see you,
Good to
John.
see you.
Good to see you. Good to see
Kwame
you.
Develle. Nice to meet you.
Good to see you in person. We've been on email.
Yeah.
Together.
Good to be together.
Hey,
Good to see you all.
Bria.
hello, it's been a while. How are
I know.
you?
Good to see you.
So I want to keep this informal. This isn't like 60 minutes interview or anything. Just
Man, not after all those emails, man. We gotta make this thing super formal.
Right on
I
it.
know it's under the email. I was like, oh, I don't know who's sending all those emails.
We're just organized.
lost
Yeah.
track.
I did get
nervous
asked.
about
I was
it.
doing
Yeah.
that, and I told him, 40 minutes, and he says 4 minutes. And he said, are you kidding?
Let me talk for 1 second. Yeah. 100 emails. Let me find my notes real quick.
Yeah, I gotta go.
So I take constructive criticism. So
Okay, so this is self-made. Is that right? I like that.
well, because we have people would buy it it's around Christmas time, and I said, no, they won't, because I was giving out as gifts.
Right.
And
You can't be shy.
Social media. No. Social. Like,
Oh,
we get a
social.
picture, like a picture of all.
Oh, for sure.
While we're. Maybe she
I work at a nonprofit. That's a 60-hour-a-week job. Okay, that's what I was doing.
Oh, my pleasure.
Appreciate you. Good. She's gonna do a picture for us now. She's gonna do a picture for us. Right.
In order for me to do this, I have to agree to have at least 3 different poses.
3 different? All I got is one pose.
There's a fun one, and then there's a makeup.
We got you. We got you. Yeah, we got you.
Thank you.
Yep.
You'll look back and appreciate that. All right. Move that screen.
It's not coming
You
out
might
right.
get a halo. You might have an angel over here who's descending from the roof.
What if you took it from this angle? What if you took it from an angle?
All right, so here we go. One, two,
You want to be in,
three.
in the picture? Okay.
You sure? Why? I don't understand that. All right, one, two, three, and first picture. Nice. Second picture for makeup. Can we get something fun and quickie, please?
Oh, we got to do something
I
different.
know. Come on. Thank you. Thank you. Diversity inclusion.
You
Come
making,
on.
you making us work. You making us work.
Thank you.
You'll learn not to ask
you.
folks in the front. They're courageous. They do anything.
That's good. I'll submit that too.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to make sure you're in the right place. We're going to belonging equals reducing attrition and increasing retention. I'm John Wilson, CIO at Spelman College, and I'll be moderating this event. And before we jump in, I just want to share some statistics with you. Thank you. Research states that belonging is not only good for workers, but also for business. Belonging can lead to a 56% increase in job performance, a 50% reduction in turnover risk, 167% increase in employer net promoter score. And that's a score of how your employees perceive and discuss the company. Do they discuss it in a good light or in a bad light? Twice as many raises, 18 times more employee promotions, a 75% increase or decrease in sick days. And all this alludes to the positive impact that belonging has on workers, leading to employee engagement and enhanced worker experience. And these statistics were supplied by Deloitte Consulting. So clearly this is a very important topic. It's the topic that this whole conference is built on, and we're going to explore it with four of our expert panelists here, which I'll get to in just a second. So actually, I'll do that now. On the far end, we have Mr. Develle Turner, who is with Deluxe Corporation, and he is their inclusion, diversity, and equity leader. Next to Develle, we have Lydia Thacker, who is a consultant with Agosto Associates. Then we have Bria Griffith, who is the inclusion and diversity leader at Honeywell Corporation. And to my immediate right, we have Kwame Johnson, who is president and CEO of Boys and Girls Clubs of Metro Atlanta. Welcome, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Develle, let's start with you. Just a foundational question to kind of give us a level set and ground us. What's your take on the difference between inclusion and belonging?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I actually, when I first heard about belonging and had already been deeply involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion, I was like, well, isn't that just inclusion? I mean, what's the difference between belonging and inclusion? And as I started doing a little more research on it, it's very simple. Inclusion is the work that the company's doing, okay? It's putting in employee resource groups. It's having developmental programs for underrepresented and marginalized folks. It's all those things that try to create an inclusive work climate, right? Belonging, very simply, is how do you feel about all that work as an employee? How do you feel? Do you feel like the climate is inclusive? Do you feel like you're engaged in that work? I mean, a lot of this that you'll read about when it comes to belonging is just engagement, which we've been doing work around for a long time. So that's really what I see as the difference between the two.
So is it possible to have one without the other?
Is it possible? No, absolutely. I don't believe it. Absolutely not. No,
Okay,
I don't believe so. I think people that automatically have in the past felt like they belong to an organization is because the culture fit them really well, right? And so it's really talking about how do we make sure that's broad so that everybody can bring their true, authentic selves to work.
So it sounds like inclusion could be described as perhaps the compliance piece of it, and then belonging is perhaps the more interpersonal piece of it?
I always stay away from the word compliance when talking about inclusion, diversity, and equity. I let legal handle that. Our EO and affirmative action folks, I let them handle that. I want to separate the two because for so long, you know, we talked about the heart, the head, and the hand, right? And the hand is that compliance, that legal piece that's, you know, got a grip on your shoulder and sometimes your throat that's saying, you must do this because the law says. And I'm not saying we don't need that. However, I think inclusion really talks about how do we build an organization that really feels right and inclusive, and again, where everybody can come, not because the attorneys told us to.
Right. And that's where the real benefits are for business, when you have employees who feel that they are included and that they belong, and then they engage and they get better work performance, and it's better for the company
right. Yeah, you said all the statistics that I had wrote down as well. We do the same research, obviously. But yeah, that's absolutely right. And it really is. This work is about performance, in individuals' performance, and organizations' performance, a team's performance. And it's shown over and over again, I don't care what study you look at, that it directly affects an organization, how they perform. I always tell people my definition of diversity simply is all the ways in which we differ that affect our performance within an organization, whether it be profit or nonprofit.
Great. Lydia, question for you. Why does belonging matter, and why should it be part of DEIB and engagement?
Good afternoon. Why does belonging matter? Well, it is critical to diversity and inclusion and equity. When you look at what belonging means and what it means to our work environment, it undergirds diversity, inclusion, and equity. We're talking about being empathetic. We're talking about caring. We're talking about feeling like we are connected to each other and connected in our work environment. And you know, sometimes that can be subtle. I remember I've had 3 careers, but when I started with the YMCA, I went 24 years ago, my first meeting was with an executive group. And of course, everybody's welcoming, you know, anything you need, the usual that you might hear. And then the meeting started. And I'm going, okay, I'm a college-educated woman, but I have no idea what these people are talking about. It was Y-speak. And so because of the language that was being used, I was excluded. I did not feel that little welcoming, warm feeling I had at the beginning was gone. And so you have to think about things like that. It could be the language that we use during the day, that maybe it gets what you need right away, but maybe we need to take a little longer to explain it so that people do not feel left out. It's about feeling connected, valued. What I bring to the table makes a difference, and it's a two-way street. So there is a responsibility for the organization to make your talent feel like they belong. But it's also your responsibility to position yourself and to be open to those actions, if you will.
So that's a very nuanced kind of approach, in my opinion. So if you're there and you're welcomed, then you're included, right?
At that moment.
At that moment. But you can be included and not feel like you belong.
It's that connection.
It's the connection.
It has to be the connection, and you don't, and the connection means that there are 2 or more parties that are involved. If you just for 5 seconds close your eyes and think of a time in your life where you really felt like you belonged, and think of 3 words that would describe that. We're not writing a thesis, so we're talking about just a few seconds. You have your experience, you have your words. You should be using those words to describe your experience in your work environment. Is that the case? Yes? 2 out of the 3 words, 1 out of the 3 words, all 3 words? That's what it takes to feel like you belong. And that's what's, interesting that recently did a module on the browning and the graying of America's workforce. And so one of the individuals that we pulled from stated that the workforce today, the workforce coming in today are not necessarily looking for a job. They want something that they can be passionate about, or at least that they could hang their hat on whatever the company is passionate about. And so that's very different from just the job. I need the paycheck, and that's still very true. But there's something else that our talent is looking for. The other thing that I would say is that we have to be very intentional about making our talent feel like they belong. It's not an afterthought. It's not we do everything else and then all of a sudden we hang, diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging onto what we do.
That's an important point. And I think oftentimes the worker, the individual, may feel like something's just not, I'm not really 100% comfortable here, what's going on. And I wonder if they couch it in the sense of, I need to have a conversation with someone, I'm here, I'm welcome, it's good, but there's something missing, and that individual needs to go and have a conversation with someone and express themselves and make sure that their concerns are known. But let me ask you this. What are some things that companies and large businesses, small businesses can do to understand those needs and to make sure that their employees feel that they're not only included, but that they belong there?
And you could utilize employee resource groups. But one of the things that I would say that is very important are the open lines of communication, so that your talent has to feel comfortable expressing what their needs are, just the same way that leaders would have to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. But it's critical about the open lines of communication. Now that you've heard it, what are you going to do? Because quickly, your talent's going to pick up, well, we met and I told them how I felt, and nothing happened. Nothing happened. And so you have to be ready. If you're going to open up that door, you have to be ready for them. I don't know if you've heard the fable from Dr. Roosevelt Thomas, the giraffe and the elephant, and I always go back to that because the giraffe was well-intended, but didn't prepare the environment for the elephant. And it's the same thing. We're throwing our doors open. We want all this talent that's coming in. Doesn't matter what they look like, what age, where they come from. Okay, so now that we've got them in the room, now what? You don't invite did you invite people to your house for Thanksgiving and hadn't planned your menu? No. You hadn't figured out what it was that you needed. All of those steps you have to take when you are, especially when your workforce starts to change. When I left the Y 2 years ago, in the C-suite, there were 7 of us that left within a year. You have to be ready.
Yeah, you do have to be ready. Great point. And I wonder now that we're in this, not post-pandemic, but post-pandemic isolation, where at least that's behind us, I'd like to think, and we have a distributed workforce. And people are working from home, they're moving out of state, they're doing all kinds of things, but they're still part of the organization. And I'm just wondering if the same principles that you just described would apply in a virtual workspace that they do, in a physical workspace.
And I've heard some leaders to speak that they're very intentional about having an opportunity for bringing individuals together. Mm-hmm. In person, for whatever that may be, if it's once a week or every 2 weeks or whatever it is, just so that they can connect. We can connect virtually. That doesn't work for everybody. I'm fine with it, but I don't really get to know you on camera. It doesn't work for me, and it doesn't work for a lot of people, and it might work for some, But I think you have to just be intentional. So what happens? Or is it the way that, when you're in a virtual space, do you just jump into the agenda? Or do you take some time on the front end to get to know who's there? Whether they're sharing or you have a specific activity or question, something that we get to know who we are. And then the other thing is take the time. And that's either virtual or in person. When you connect, I want you to be authentic. Don't say good morning to me, how are you, and you're already out the door before I've responded. That's not authentic. I know you don't mean any of it. Okay, so we have to take the time in order to connect and be very intentional about how we communicate. Learn how our talent wants to be communicated with. Meet them halfway. I think we should have a personal connection. They just say, just send me the text. So you might get 50-50.
Yeah, good points. I'm learning a lot. I tend to like the screen and the text messages and all that, but it's important to be physically connected or to have an opportunity to get connected. So thank you for that.
So you're not texting.
Right.
It's all right to multitask.
But there's another perspective. Bria, I'd like to hear your thoughts on leadership's role in creating a culture of belonging.
Yeah, so I think for me, when I in my mind, defining belonging, right, and getting to that core, getting to the core of what it is, people want to feel seen, they want to feel heard, they want their contributions to be respected in the workplace. And I think that's really the challenge with belonging, is that it is perception, right? But I think boiling it down, people just want to know that they have a place somewhere, right? So it's not the fitting in part, because to me, that's the inclusion. We can all fit in. We all know how to fit into places, right? We know how to do that. We know how to morph ourselves and do the things that we need to do to get through a situation, right? Belonging is much deeper. So it's more complicated, quite frankly, I think. And so from a leadership standpoint, it has to be modeled. I really do think about diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, belonging, right? All of our alphabet soup that we now have. I think about it in terms of like personal trainers, where they always tell you that you cannot outwork a bad diet, right? And so what is an organization's diet? It's the culture, right? So all of these alphabets sit inside of a culture, and who really is responsible for directing the culture? It's the leaders in your organization. So they have to model that behavior. So that looks like, when we're in meetings, being authentic, right? So it's, yes, we have ERGs, we're involved in the community, we have all these things from an inclusion standpoint. We are checking our inclusion boxes, right? But what does that look like for people to really be plugged into how folks are feeling about those things, right? So yes, there's an ERG, but is the ERG properly resourced? Is it really, honing in on what that particular group of employees is looking for in the workplace? Or are we just checking the box that we have in ERG, right? And so in thinking about how leaders can really start to demonstrate and model that, there were a couple of things that came up for me. And I think starting with focusing on people. So you have to be a leader that not only is looking at our check the box activities, but are we even being inclusive in our engagement, right? So it's easy to do it. Let's have a happy hour. Well, everybody doesn't drink, right? Everybody doesn't drink alcohol for a myriad of different reasons. There are people who are caretakers. So everything can't be at 5 because I got to be gone by 5:30, right? Or I'm only going to be there for a couple of minutes because I got to race and go do a thing. So I think even in the engagement pieces of this, we have to think about how to be more inclusive so that people feel that they have a place, right? And for me, that's the leaders are really there to set that tone for creating place and space. And so even in thinking about career conversations, let's really have a career conversation. What are you trying to do? Like, so as a leader, I want to know, what's the ladder look like for you? Because you may be on a path that for all intents and purposes, you're never going to feel like you belong because it's not what you want to do. So how can I, as a leader, start to help you navigate that. And so I really do think leaders have to start with connection, and that's in transparency about the things that they value, right? So if I don't show up and tell people these are the things that I value in the workplace, how are people supposed to know to articulate those things for themselves, right? And so I know we talk a lot about authenticity, in the diversity, equity, inclusion space. I tend to shy away from that word. I think we need to be our best selves, right? And so how can we create environments for people to show up and do their best work? And when people feel like they have a place somewhere, they tend to do that, right? And so even when you may not have all of the check the box inclusivity things, leaders can create environments where people feel like, you know what, I feel good when I come here, right? I don't feel like this is a place that I don't want to be.
Interesting perspective. Let me ask you this. Where do you think we are? And I know you don't have any statistics, but just, kind of anecdotally, with this notion of belonging being infused in corporate cultures and business cultures throughout the country.
I think we're working on it, right? It's interesting to me when you look at the arc of just, what we call now even Jedi, because it's justice. We've added justice in that mix, right? It started out with affirmative action, but the goals are all still the same. And so I think as we continue to evolve as humans, as we continue to create space for people who are different than us, when I think about diversity and inclusion, diversity is the mix, inclusion is making the mix work, right? And so from a belonging standpoint, we really have to get to a place where none of those things matter, right? Because we're all here. If we're in a tech company, we're all here to do technology. And the only reason those things matter is because we're bringing different perspectives, ideas, experiences to the table that help that technology be better, right? And so I think we're working on it. And I think the more we evolve as humans, and quite frankly, the more we keep the conversation going, right? We all know we're in very trying times, right? Not only in this country, just in the world. There's just a lot of stuff happening. But I think the more that we push humanity at the front of that, to start with human, I tell people all the time, let's start with the human. So we're all, we're all different, but we're all trying to have the same human experience, right? And so in thinking about how we create that human experience among one another, I think we'll continue to evolve as to, from a workplace standpoint.
This is a question for the panel, and anyone can respond. What are your thoughts on the role of technology in terms of belonging? Have you seen it used, for example, a data science initiative that surveys employees across the country and then maps that to a zip code or other factors to determine, what are some things that we can do with this data to help drive this principle into our culture? Is there a role for technology to be able to assist with that, do you think?
Pass me the mic, because I haven't spoken yet, right? Yeah, that's definitely an answer for you. I think you could better answer that question. But what I will say is, none of this even happens if young people don't graduate high school, right? I think we just had an amazing fireside chat, and you remember that Erica said that only 4% of people born in poverty in Atlanta make it out. And I want you to understand how really serious that is, because we hear that number, and I think sometimes we just gloss over it, right? I also want you to know that the fastest way out of poverty is a high school diploma. It is. I've been in this work 20 years trying to help young people not make the bad decisions that I made when I was a young person and went to prison at the age of 17, but more importantly, graduate high school. Because if you can graduate high school, you got at least a shot of getting out of poverty, right? So we got to think about how we can help more young people even get ready for this corporate environment. We talk a lot about career and college readiness, the pipeline, but what I worry from the seat that I'm in and what I see going on in the community is that we're forgetting it's a long way from kindergarten to graduation. And I see the corporate community in particular shifting more into the college and career space, which I get it, right? Pipeline is a big issue. We want more talent. But from where I sit, there's such a long way from a young person getting from kindergarten to even being ready to get into a corporate environment and feeling like they belong. So I think as a city, we got to focus on poverty as our number one challenge and the number one solution being high school graduation. That is our best shot. I can debate you all day long about the biggest problem we face, not only in Atlanta, but in our country, and it's poverty. Poverty is the biggest. It's not racism. That's an issue. There's a lot of issues we have. The biggest problem we face is poverty. If you look at the news, we talked about the 12-year-old, right, in Atlantic Station. If you look at, let's just take murder rates from last year, over 130 murders in Atlanta. Murders are terrible, one of the worst crimes. Of the 130 murders, only 5 people had a high school diploma. I could talk for days and days about this, but I want you to be very clear on what the true problem we face as a city, and it's poverty. We got to help make young people get to that next level. Another solution is exposure, right? I'm a C student, so I keep things very simple. I think sometimes we overcomplicate. I am a C student. You actually depend on who I work with. I am not an A student, but I think we overcomplicate things as adults. These solutions are much more simple than we think. We did this pilot with the water boys, right? You see them on the corners. I don't agree with what they're doing, but when you get to talk to them, you really realize that they're entrepreneurs. So the city and the mayor, and they tasked us to work with these young boys, right? And we created a program called the Young Entrepreneurs Program. So we tapped into the talent that they had already, right? And just reshifted it, rethought how we, position what these young people were doing. And believe me, when they see it, when they see someone like me or John sitting up here, or you all, they start to believe that they can do it. But if they don't see you all, if you all aren't showing up in these schools, you're not showing up in the community, and I love to give you ways to do that with us at Big Brothers and Big Sisters, because we bring you into our schools. We bring young people into the corporate environment. We actually have a program called Workplace Mentoring, where we get high school students to go inside of the corporate environment to get a mentor, which is super important. I want to talk a little bit more about that, but also to get that exposure, right? To start seeing themselves in those spaces. We're talking about belonging. Sometimes going to a corporate campus is intimidating. If you've never been to that campus, you're the first to graduate high school, you're the first to graduate college, the first to get a job in corporate. Like, we got to think about some of these basic fundamental things that we overlook in the role that we can play as adults in mentoring young people. Like, how many of you all are mentoring somebody? How many of you all are mentoring somebody that don't look like you, right? To give them just some of these basic things that they can learn from you, to feel like they belong and that they can, be a part of what we all are a part of. The last thing I'll say is confidence. It is important for young people who are entering the workforce to have confidence. And that starts with them being comfortable with their stories. Because a lot of these young people we're talking about, they're coming to the workforce with some trauma, some stuff they've been through. We all got stories. I talk about my story all around this country. And what I realize is a lot of people are not comfortable with their story. And if you're not comfortable with your story, you're not comfortable with who you are. And you can't show up as the best leader, right? So we got to help young people, young leaders, build that confidence. My first job, I worked for a black CEO, and he showed me that I could be a CEO. It was that simple. He took me around, took me in meetings, helped me build that confidence. I never thought that I could do that before I spent that time with him. So those are some practical things I hope you all think about as we go down this road, because none of this happens. DEI, none of this stuff happens if young people don't graduate high school.
That is a different perspective, and you made a point that I want to pull out just a little bit, and that has to do with the linkage between exposure and belonging. So you can physically be somewhere and be included, for example. I can use myself as an example. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and my first job out of college was with Xerox Corporation. In retrospect, I can say, I'm not sure I belonged there. It was a very different place. But I felt that way because neither one of my parents had corporate backgrounds. It was completely new to me, even though I had been to college. And so I think that's a very important point, is that you have to be exposed to certain things so that you can begin to internalize it and think about it and figure out where you fit in. And if without that, it's an even bigger challenge.
And you know what, John, to your point, or your question earlier, and to what Kwame just said, it's about making sure that we have accessibility for those young folks. Just like I think it was Erica, and I apologize, it came in late, I think that was her name, was talking about, right? To broadband. So they don't, run out of data on their phone, and they're still able to use. Can you all not hear me in the back without this in my face? I thought so. As she was talking about, that's where the technology comes into it, right?
Right.
And how we make sure that Kwame's kids have that access to see and experience those things that you're talking about in order to grow and see that it's possible for themselves.
You're absolutely right, and the digital divide is real and it's persistent. It's still there. In the early days, it was about access, and I think Bill Gates is an excellent example. Bill Gates became Bill Gates because from a very young age, he had access to a mainframe, and he learned how to program it, and he got really good at it, et cetera, et cetera. Dell, Jobs, the scenario is the same. You have to have that early exposure. And you fast forward, to today, and we still have, and I learned this during the pandemic, even in the city of Atlanta, even in New York, Los Angeles, major metropolitan areas, there are gaps in broadband availability. And that's tragic. And there are things happening now to try to bridge that gap. But that just contributes more to this conversation about
Who's here from Xfinity?
belonging.
Let's get it moving.
Yeah.
Keep it
Let's
moving.
talk.
All right, that'd be good.
We are running low on time, but we have a little bit left. Want to do a couple things. For the panel here, if you had a magic wand, what's your blue sky vision for this topic in the workplace over the next, I don't know, what's a realistic time frame, 10, 15 years? What would you like to see, or could you describe the environment, an optimal environment where belonging has existed for a while? What does it look like?
I'll kick us off. So, my big dream, and I talk about this quite a bit, is to really make mentorship a part of the fabric of Atlanta. I think I talked about that quite a bit already, and just to give you some results, 95% of our kids graduate high school on time. 99% never touch the criminal justice system because they have mentors like you all walking alongside them. What's interesting about mentorship is that the term mentorship does not exist in Latin. Actually, it doesn't exist in a lot of languages. And if you talk to someone from Latin country, for example, they'll tell you that they think mentorship is family. So they don't even need the word. It's a part of what they do, right? I'm from the north, Syracuse, New York. I know there's some New Yorkers in here who are not going to count Syracuse, so I count it. It's not Brooklyn or, that kind of stuff. But when you come to the South, you hear about this thing called Southern hospitality, especially when from the north like me. And you realize that it's a real thing. It's actually hard to describe, but the best way I could describe it is like when you get to Miami, you get off the plane, that humidity hit you in the face, and you feel it. You know it's a real thing. What's interesting about Southern hospitality is that most of the people here aren't from here. We got folks from all around this country here in Atlanta. And whether you're from New York or California, you come here and you adopt this thing called Southern hospitality. It becomes a part of what we do, and it still stands as a part of what we do. So my hope is the same way Southern hospitality has become a thing that we do here, that mentorship could be a part of what we do here, right? And you can do it with us. I'd love to learn more about how you can get involved with us. Bring us into your companies to, get you involved with young people in Atlanta. Upinda, my colleague, is here that can talk to you about that as well. But let's make mentorship a part of what we do in all of your companies and all of what you do. And if you all are not mentoring somebody, you are not a true leader. I said it. We all got time to do it. That don't got to be with me. That could be on your own time. But if you are not pouring back into somebody, because none of us got to this room without mentorship. And if you got to this room without mentorship, we need to get a sample of your blood because you are someone we need to replicate.
I think what I'd like to see in the future workplace really harkens to what Kwame is saying, but people like me have worked ourselves out of a job because we have operationalized DEI to the point that it's literally just what we do. I see it in everything, right? So it's the way we deal with customers, it's the way we deal with our employees, it's the way we deal with the community. That's just what we do. So what I hope to see, especially from a belonging angle, is that connection is no longer separate. We all know this. We compartmentalize our lives. There's my work self, my after work self, my family self, right? We compartmentalize ourselves. And so I think that creates a challenge in the workplace, quite frankly, for belonging, because we don't allow ourselves genuine connection with one another. And so we put tasks before people instead of putting people before tasks. And if I get to know you, hearkening back to something that Kwame just said, if I know your origin story, if I know what motivates you, if I know the things that keep you up at night, it's easier for us to develop the next technology, the next innovation, because now we know where we're coming from. Now we're all on the same page about how we're approaching this problem together. And so what I hope to see is that the connections that we have outside of work start to enter the workplace, number one. And number two, we have operationalized diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, all of it, to the point where it's just what we do. This is just how we, in the marketplace, in the workplace, in the community, this is exactly how we interact with one another.
Okay, so several things that I was thinking about as I was listening to the speakers. One about mentors, had a lot of mentors, but also have been a mentor to many. It is our responsibility every time we have an interaction to leave something with someone and they should be leaving something with you. That's just how it should happen. So I think I was impressed. There's a school in Newnan, a high school, and they have serious issues with the graduation rate. The administration there said everyone in the school had to be a mentor to a child. Every child in the school had a mentor. Didn't matter if you were the teacher, the custodian, if you worked in the kitchen, were you in the media center, didn't matter. And then when they layered on all the other needs for the children, they had a clothing store is what they called it, so children wouldn't feel that way. Someone that dealt with homelessness, because many of the students did not have anywhere to go at night. So I think that's an important piece. What was interesting as I decided that I would do some research, and many of you may have found the same, we've been talking about belonging since about 2010. And we may have made some baby steps. And then came the pandemic, which just sort of forced us, not only that, but also current events. So we just need to be very intentional about, okay, so now we're talking about belonging. What are we going to do? And what are we going to do that sticks? Because in 10 years, you don't want to say, oh, since 2010, we've been talking about belonging.
Right.
This is not a new thing.
Yeah.
This is not a new thing. And so what I would like to see is that it is, and it would happen organically, is that it is part of what we do.
What they said. But in all seriousness, I talked earlier about the head, the heart, and the hand, right? And the head, I didn't say it, but the head is about knowing that diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging is good for business, good for your organization, it makes individuals perform better, you have less sick days, you have less turnover, all that stuff, right? And so the statistics can get your head going. The hand, as I said earlier, is that compliance piece where your attorneys are saying, hey, let's not get in trouble, okay? Where I want to see us get to, and which is the hardest piece of it, is the heart. And why I say that is people like Kwame and I that have dealt with the justice system on that end, okay, and that when we got into our different organizations did not see a lot of people like us and how that felt to be the only one in the room, okay? It's easier for us to know from the heart that this is important work. How do we get people that don't have those experiences get there, all right, where their heart is truly in it? That's where I want to see us go, okay? And it's not easy to do. And I asked a question of an individual at a session one time. It's like, well, how do you get them there? And they said, make them uncomfortable. And I've done that and got my hand slapped. So it's not as easy as that. I agree with them wholeheartedly. I've made people uncomfortable, and they're in tears because they get it. Because they get it. They see what other people go through, okay? And so that's where I'd like to see it go, is that it's in the heart.
Thank you. I think that we're a little bit over time here, but I want to extend a sincere thank you to our panel. That was a very, very insightful conversation, and thank you for sharing your experience and your insights with us and your time. Thank you so much. Thank you.